Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into something, well, truly remarkable. A structure that's just fundamental to your everyday life, yet it's packed with, complex anatomy and a really deep evolutionary history.
Absolutely. And our source for this is a foundational textbook excerpt. It promises to take us way beyond just, naming bones and
Right, it
muscles.
gets into the how and the why.
And it kicks off with this surprising quote, almost a riddle. One pronates while giving and supinates while getting. What does that even mean?
Exactly. It sounds cryptic, but
Yeah.
it's actually pointing to something very specific, anatomically speaking, about how your arm works. And that's our mission today, right? To dig into this source text.
Yeah, to understand the architecture, the function, and the incredible journey that actually built the upper limb you use constantly every single day.
We're treating this text as, like, the blueprint, maybe a historical record, and a functional manual all rolled into one.
The goal is really to get into the weeds here, understand everything this text is telling us about the upper limb, and hopefully gain a level of insight, a mastery almost, of this specific body of knowledge presented in the source.
So you can appreciate this structure like never before.
Mm.
And why focus on your upper limb? Well, just look at your hands for a second.
Mm.
They can do amazing things, right? Astonishing precision, sometimes immense power, intricate communication. All these tasks you probably take for granted,
Typing, driving, cooking.
or even surgery, playing music.
Eh,
It all comes down to this structure. Understanding the design helps us really marvel at what it can do.
And the source points out straight away, while we share a basic plan with, say, four-legged animals, human evolution really reshaped this blueprint. Completely different purposes now.
Okay, so let's start where the source starts, with that foundational principle, the basic blueprint of vertebrate limbs.
Right. The text says, initially, both forelimbs and hind limbs in quadrupeds, think animals like cows or dogs, they evolved for a primary role.
Mm.
Supporting weight and locomotion. Basically, moving the body around, they were pillars and levers.
So back when our ancestors were on all fours, their front and back legs were doing pretty much the same job. Not like now, where one set walks and the other does everything else.
Exactly. And the source lays out the common design they shared. Every limb, front or back, has sort of two main bits.
Okay,
There's a basal segment, the source calls it the girdle, and then there's the free part of the limb.
the girdle. What's its function in this basic plan?
According to the text, its main job is articulation. It connects the free part of the limb to the axial skeleton.
Axial skeleton being the spine, ribs, skull, the core of the body.
Precisely. The girdle is the anchor, the bridge. It transfers forces between the limb and the trunk.
Got it. The structural link and the free part.
The free part, everything hanging off the girdle, is consistently divided into three segments. The text describes them as proximal.
Closest to the body.
Right. Then a middle segment, and finally, a distal segment, the furthest bit out.
And the source mentions a key feature of that distal segment, something common across many vertebrates.
Yes. A defining characteristic mentioned is that this distal segment typically carries 5 digits. The pentadactyl limb, 5 fingers, 5 toes. It's a fundamental pattern.
Wow. So this basic setup girdle, three-part free limb, 5 digits, that's the starting point for your arms and legs right now.
Exactly. Your shoulder girdle, your arm, that's the proximal bit, your forearm, middle, and your hand, distal, with 5 digits. It follows the plan.
And the same for the lower limb. Hip girdle, thigh, leg, and foot with 5 digits. Same pattern.
Which leads us straight into homology. The source uses table 1.1 to show this really clearly. Homology just means, well, structures are similar because they evolved from a common ancestor.
Right, even if they look different or do different jobs now, like comparing our arm bones to a bat's wing bones.
Exactly. And the source shows this within our own bodies, comparing upper and lower limbs, even though they do vastly different things in humans: legs for standing and walking, arms for reaching and grabbing.
Their underlying structure is remarkably similar. It's proof of that shared evolutionary past from those quadrupedal limbs.
Let's go through the specific pairs from table 1.1 in the source. It really drives it home.
Okay.
Starting closest to the body, the shoulder girdle in the upper limb is homologous to the hip girdle in the lower limb. Both are those bony rings anchoring the limb.
Makes sense. Then the big joint connecting the girdle to the free limb.
The shoulder joint corresponds to the hip joint, those large, often ball and socket joints allowing lots of movement.
Moving down the proximal segment.
The arm, with its single bone, the humerus, is homologous to the thigh, with its single bone, the femur.
And the joint between the proximal and middle parts.
The elbow joint is homologous to the knee joint.
Okay, the middle segment now.
The forearm, with its two bones, the radius and ulna, that's homologous to the leg, with its two bones, the tibia and fibula.
Then the joint connecting the middle to the distal segment.
The wrist joint corresponds to the ankle joint.
And finally, the end part with the digits.
The hand, which the source breaks down into carpus, wrist bones, metacarpus, palm bones, and 5 digits, is homologous to the foot, made of the tarsus, ankle heel bones, metatarsus, foot bones, and 5 digits, toes.
That table is like a compressed evolutionary story. It shows how the same basic building blocks were adapted, repurposed over millions of years.
Right. The significance, as the source implies, is that while the parts list is similar, the fine-tuning, how they connect, how they move, how they're controlled, that's where the specialization happened.
One set for stability and power, the other for reach, flexibility, and, fine motor skills.
It shows how evolution works, right? Modifying what's already there instead of starting from scratch. Very efficient.
Okay, so we've got the big picture, the blueprint, the homology. Now let's follow the source and dive into the specifics of the upper limb itself. It breaks it down into 4 main regions, right, based on table 1.2 and figure 1.1.
Yeah, exactly. Those 4 are the shoulder region, the arm, the brachium, the forearm, antebrachium, and the hand, manus. Each part plays its role.
Let's start with the shoulder region. The source says this includes the pectoral area on the chest.
The axilla or armpit.
And the scapular region on the back around the shoulder blade.
And the bones here form the shoulder girdle, just 2 bones. The clavicle, your collarbone, and the scapula, the shoulder blade.
And here's a detail the source really highlights, which seems key for understanding how the shoulder moves.
What's that?
Of these 2 bones, only the clavicle directly connects bone to bone with the axial skeleton at the sternoclavicular joint, where it meets the breastbone.
That is a really significant point. It means the scapula itself doesn't bolt onto the ribs or spine.
So what holds it there?
Muscles. Lots of muscles. The source says the scapula is mobile. It basically floats on the back of the thorax, held and moved by this complex muscular sling.
So the clavicle acts like a strut, holding the shoulder out, while the scapula can slide and rotate around.
Pretty much. And the clavicle and scapula do meet each other at the acromioclavicular joint out near the tip of the shoulder.
And the reason for this setup, why is it structured like this?
It's all about mobility. The source emphasizes this arrangement-stable strut from the clavicle. Mobile base from the scapula is what allows the incredible range of motion at the shoulder joint.
All those ways you can move your arm overhead, behind your back, big circles.
It starts with the mobility of the shoulder girdle itself. It's not just a simple hinge, it's a dynamic platform.
Okay, a mobile platform. Moving down, the second part, the arm or brachium, shoulder down to the elbow.
Structurally simpler here, just one bone. The humerus, the long bone of your upper arm.
And its upper end connects to the scapula.
Yes, the head of the humerus fits into a shallow socket on the scapula called the glenoid cavity. That's the main shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint.
And the source says it's this joint where the major arm movements happen relative to the shoulder girdle and trunk?
Right. This is where the leverage really starts. The humerus acts as a key part of that jointed lever system, pivoting at the shoulder joint against the scapula's mobile base. Big muscles attached to the humerus to drive those movements.
Lifting, pushing, pulling, powered from the shoulder and arm. Got it. All right, third part. The forearm, antebrachium, elbow down to the wrist.
Now, unlike the arm, the forearm has 2 bones, the radius and the ulna. They lie side by side.
Okay, 2 bones, and they connect to the humerus at the elbow.
Yep, their upper ends meet the lower end of the humerus, forming the elbow joint, and their lower ends meet the small wrist bones, forming the wrist joint.
And they also connect to each other.
Crucially, yes. The source mentions the radial-ulnar joints, one near the elbow, proximal, and one near the wrist, distal. This is key.
Why is that so key? Let's talk movements. The elbow joint itself, humerus, radius, ulna, what does it mainly do?
Flexion and extension, bending and straightening the forearm, pretty much movement in one plane.
Simple hinge-like action.
But those radial-ulnar joints where the radius and ulna meet each other, they allow something totally different. Rotation, pronation, and supination.
Ah, back to our opening quote.
Yeah.
The source describes these clearly, right? Using the elbow flex position.
Yeah, it's a great visual. In a mid-flexed elbow, the palm faces upwards in supination and downwards in pronation.
Perfect. Elbow bent 90 degrees, palm up is supination.
Palm down is pronation.
And how does that physically happen? What are the bones doing? The source explains this mechanism.
It says that during pronation, the radius rotates around the ulna. The ulna stays relatively put, especially at the elbow end, while the radius, that's the bone on your thumb side, pivots and actually crosses over the ulna.
So that crossing over motion is pronation. You need two bones for that twist.
Exactly. One bone like the humerus, just bend and straighten. Two bones with these pivot points. Now you can rotate your hand, essential for manipulation.
Which brings us back perfectly to one pronates while giving and supinates while getting. When you hand something over.
You usually turn your palm down, pronation.
And when you reach out to take something.
You turn your palm up, making a sort of cup, supination.
It's brilliant. Such a simple, everyday action that perfectly illustrates this specific, vital anatomical movement. It makes pronation and supination instantly understandable.
And it shows why it matters functionally, even in just basic human interaction. That forearm rotation is a critical layer of dexterity.
Okay, onward to the fourth and final part. The hand or manus. The business end, you could say.
Definitely the primary tool for manipulating the world. The source divides it into 3 bits. The wrist, carpus, the palm area, metacarpus, and the 5 digits.
The wrist, the carpus, that's complex.
Yeah.
8 small carpal bones, the source says, in 2 rows. Allows flexibility, absorbs shock.
Yep. Then distal to those are the 5 metacarpal bones, forming the framework of the palm, 1 for each digit.
And then the digits themselves. The source is very specific here. First is the thumb, pollex. Second is the index finger. Third, middle. Fourth, ring. Fifth, little finger. Lateral to medial.
And within the digits, the phalanges. The source counts them out. 3 phalanges for each finger, digits 2 to 5, but only 2 for the thumb, digit 1.
So that's 3 by 4 plus 2. 14 phalanges total in one hand.
14 small bones just in the fingers and thumb. That alone tells you something about the potential for fine segmented movement.
The source's table also lists the joints within the hand itself. We have the main wrist joint, radiocarpal, where the radius meets the carpals.
Then the intercarpal joints, between the carpal bones, little gliding movements adding to wrist flexibility.
Then carpometacarpal joints, where carpals meet metacarpals.
And the table mentions intermetacarpal joints too, between the metacarpals, though movement there is pretty limited except, crucially, for the thumb.
Then the knuckles. Metacarpophalangeal joints, where metacarpals meet the first phalanx of each digit. Bending, straightening, spreading fingers.
And finally, within the fingers and thumb, the interphalangeal joints. Between the phalanges themselves, 2 per finger, 1 in the thumb, for curling your fingers.
Wow, that's a lot of moving parts in a small space. The source says the hand's overall movements come mainly from the wrist joint flexion, extension, side to side.
But the real magic is in the digits. And the source specifically calls out the thumb's movement, happening mainly at its carpometacarpal joint. And it highlights the key movement. Opposition.
Opposition, the ability to touch the thumb tip to the other fingertip.
Exactly. That unique human ability, thanks to the shape of that joint and the muscles, it's fundamental for gripping, pinching, fine manipulation, using tools, writing, everything.
While the other fingers mostly just bend and straighten at their joints.
So pulling it all together, the source calls the hand a grasping tool and describes it as exquisitely adaptable. Powerful fist one moment, delicate instrument the next.
And it makes that crucial link, this adaptability is under the control of a large area of the brain.
Huge amount of brain power dedicated to controlling and sensing the hands, which supports the source's big conclusion.
Which is?
The unique position of man as a master mechanic of the animal world is because of the skilled movements of his hands. Our ability to manipulate the world with such skill is defining.
It's not just anatomy. It's anatomy plus brain control equaling unique capability. The master mechanic.
Okay, so we've seen with the current structure. Now the source shifts to the how did it get this way? The evolution.
This part explains the why behind features like pronation and thumb opposition. It starts way back. Forelimbs evolving from fish fins.
Pectoral fins, yeah. From swimming stabilizers.
To limbs for walking on land. The source mentions early tetrapods using all 4 limbs for weight bearing and locomotion, the basic quadruped plan.
But then came that key shift in our lineage, arboreal life, living in trees.
And that, the source says, emancipated the forelimbs, freed them up from constantly holding body weight.
And that freedom allowed them to develop new skills. The source lists them. Prehension or grasping, feeling, picking, holding, sorting, breaking, fighting, etc. All manipulative tasks.
And these new functions drove specific structural changes according to the source, adaptations for the new jobs.
First one mentioned, Pronation and supination again, the source gives a direct reason for their evolution.
Which
So food could be picked up and taken to the mouth. A fundamental survival need drove the development of forearm rotation.
makes perfect sense. Being able to rotate your hand to get food to your mouth efficiently.
Second modification, the clavicle. The source explicitly says it has evolved with the function of prehension.
So the collarbone isn't just passive, it's actively linked to grasping. How?
It provides that stable base for muscles used in grasping. It positions the shoulder correctly for powerful prehensile actions, giving the arm the right leverage and range.
Okay. Third modification, maybe the most human, the thumb rotation.
Yeah, that 90-degree rotation allowing it to be opposed to other digits for grasping, essential for precision grip, power grip, a specific adaptation for better manipulation.
Without that, no master mechanic status.
The source also mentions a general category, appropriate changes for free mobility of the fingers and hand, covering all the intricate joint and muscle developments for dexterity.
Interestingly, though, despite all these changes for manipulation, the source notes we kept the original 5-digit pattern.
Right. While other animals lost digits, like snakes losing limbs entirely, or horses reducing down to one main digit per foot for running.
We kept all 5, but repurposed them for manipulation instead of just locomotion.
Finally, the source mentions brachiation swinging by the arms, like in apes. It notes the effects: longer forearms, longer palms, and fingers in apes.
So comparing that to humans, based only on the text, it seems like different pressures were at play.
Yeah, it looks like it. The ape lineage adapted for swinging longer reach. The human lineage adapted more for grasping and manipulating objects, thumb rotation, pronation, supination.
Different paths from a similar starting point,
Right.
driven by different needs. Fascinating.
Okay, let's try to bring this all together. We've done a pretty deep dive into the upper limbs architecture using this source text as our guide.
We started with that basic vertebra blueprint, saw the homology between our arms and legs, same parts, different jobs.
Then we broke down the upper limb, the mobile shoulder girdle, the humerus in the arm acting as a lever, the forearm with its crucial pronation supination.
And the incredibly complex hand, all those bones and joints, and that vital thumb opposition.
We also traced the evolutionary story. Fish fins to land limbs, then the forelimbs freed up in the trees.
Leading to key changes like forearm rotation for feeding, the clavicle linked to grasping, and that critical thumb rotation.
And all of this culminates, as the source puts it, in the hand's exquisite adaptability, controlled by a large brain area, making us the master mechanic of the animal world.
By digging into every detail the source offered, from the basic plan to evolution, hopefully you, the listener, have gained a really deep appreciation for what's going on in your own arms and hands.
It's way more than just bones and muscles. It's structure, function, and deep history all intertwined.
And for a final thought, stemming directly from this material, the source connects the hand skill, the brain's control, and our unique human ability to interact with the world, that master mechanic idea.
Right. So given that link between the physical tool, the brain controlling it, and what we can do, consider this. How much does this intricate physical structure we've explored today actually shape or even define our human potential, our unique way of being in the world?
It's a big question. But the next time you pick something up, type an email, just wave hello, maybe take a second.
Yeah, just appreciate the millions of years of evolution, the complex anatomy, the neural control, all working together in that simple action.
It really is an incredible piece of engineering, constantly at your fingertips.